Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Wasan Kumar. I'm a brown man with clear rimmed glasses and a blue shirt. In front of me is a slide that reads Campus Safety at UIC with a beige background and says a conversation in partnership with Undergraduate Student Government, UIC GEO, UIC-UF, Good Trouble Coalition, the Black Graduate Student Association, the Black Student Union, Students for Justice in Palestine, and Abolition at UIC. I'm an undergraduate student and president of the Undergraduate Student Government. We want to begin today's event by recognizing that this conversation is taking place in Chicago, where we are located on the traditional homelands of the Council of the Three Fires, the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi nations. Many other tribes, such as the Kickapoo, Peoria, Miamia, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Sauk, and Fox, also call this area home. And so I say this as a way to remind us of the histories of genocide and settler colonialism and looting that the dominant narrative of this country is predicated on. And I hope that we can remember and remain aware of this throughout our conversation as we reflect on public safety at UIC. Now, a little bit more about how we can both engage in this space today. Today's conversation consists of a panel discussion followed by a question and answer portion of the conversation, which is where we encourage you to use the chat and Q&A to share your thoughts with panelists. The chat is going to be available to everybody in these last half an hour of the program today. So if you have any thoughts, please feel free to write them down, note them down, but please just hold them to that Q&A portion. This event will also be recorded, and there will be live cart captioning provided by our captioner here, and just hit the button at the bottom of your Zoom screen to turn that on. Next, I'm going to have Dr. David Stovall, a professor in criminology, law and justice, and Black studies, who will be moderating this panel discussion. But before that, he's going to provide us with an introduction and to contextualize just how we got here.
Sorry about that. Excuse my muting everyone. Peace and greetings, everybody. My name is Dave Stovall. As was mentioned, I'm in Black Studies and Criminology, Law, and Justice. I am a Black man who is wearing a green shirt and has speaking in a particular background of a cream color background, just to give us a concept of how we got to this moment. Earlier this year, we witnessed the deaths of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, Tony McDade, and then following alongside students at other universities across the nation, Black students at UIC also delivered a list of demands to the administration on June 15th. Since then, the chancellor and other administrators have hosted discussions and convened workshops in an attempt to identify the course of action to respond to the demands of students, faculty, and staff. And I would encourage anyone who has not seen those demands to please get a copy of those demands to educate yourself on what folks are asking and then how they are pushing forward in terms of these asks. While the chancellor created a UIC Police Safety Board, we have yet to have a real conversation about policing and safety at UIC. And the Police Safety Board was not the intention or the ask or demand by the students, and it's important to state that. And what the students have asked for is a different set of demands. And they have a vision of safety at UIC that goes beyond the creation of the Public Safety Board. And today they'll be sharing their perspectives about what UIC could look like. Each speaker has prepared to speak 5 to 7 minutes on the topics of violent crime, sexual assault, prevention and promotion, the logistics of abolishing the police, and the future of UIC. And just real quick, I'm going to give a brief introduction of those speakers. So we have Erin O'Callaghan, who is from the Graduate Employees Organization, is a PhD candidate in criminology, law, and justice, a scholar of sexual violence, and a victim of campus sexual assault. Andrea Daviera from the Graduate Employees Organization is a fourth-year doctoral candidate who broadly researches positive youth development in the context of violence, safety, and policing at the Community and Prevention Research Program in the Psychology Department. Jeff Shirkey is a visiting lecturer in the history department who is a labor historian representing the UIC United faculty. Wasan Kumar from undergraduate student government is a fourth-year undergraduate student studying neuroscience and president of the undergraduate student government. Layla is a third-year student here at UIC in industrial design and president of the Students for Justice for Palestine. Mona is a fourth-year public policy student organizer with Students for Justice in Palestine. Alexis Grant from the Black Graduate Students Association is a third-year PhD student in community health sciences and the president of the Black Graduate Student Association. Elizabeth Harrison, who's a PhD candidate in disability studies and a co-organizer with Abolition at UIC. Jamoke Taiwo is an undergraduate student in their last year at UIC, an organizer and an artist studying public policy and political science, and is also with Abolition at UIC. So we want to start with talking about some of the myths and big questions related to campus safety at UIC. The first topic is on sexual assault, with which Aaron Callahan, will speak on, and I'll turn the mic over to Aaron.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Dr. Stovall, for that introduction. My name is Erin. I am a white woman with long brown hair, and I'm also wearing a white shirt. And before I get started, just a content warning for everything that I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to be talking about sexual assault. So if you need to take a moment to maybe mute me, that's totally fine. So the biggest question when we're talking about, abolishing the police and defunding the police, I feel like a lot of people who are against that idea sort of ask this question about, well, what do we do about the rapists? What do we do about rape? How are we going to solve rape without the police? So I'm hoping that what I'll talk about today will speak to why that's not really a question that makes sense to ask, because police already don't do anything about sexual violence. So first of all, most survivors don't report to the police, period. In 2018, only about 25% of rape victims reported their assaults to the police. So 3/4 of rape victims already don't report to the police, myself included. I was sexually assaulted in college as well as my first year of graduate school. I didn't report either of those to the police. Even those that are reported to the police, fewer are forwarded to prosecutors, and even fewer go to trial, and even fewer rapists spend a day in jail. So you want to know what we do about rapists? They're already out there. They're already around us, because most cases don't ever see the inside of a courtroom. And this is particularly true with sexual assaults that involve acquaintances. Most sexual assaults involve somebody that the victim knows, and rapes involving alcohol or substance use at the time of the assault. So for particular to campus sexual assault, about 50% of those are going to involve some type of substance use at the time of the assault. And most of those are going to involve acquaintances, and those are less likely to be assaults that will have any involvement with any part of the criminal legal system. So already we're seeing that most survivors are never going to engage with these systems, particularly with police. And a lot of that is because most survivors don't want to go to the police. And I'll include myself in that. That was not a decision that I wanted to make. And most survivors also don't want to make that decision. They don't want to go to the police. What they really want is, medical care, counseling, other services like housing, the ability to take time off from work or to get accommodations. So specific to the campus, they might want to change their schedule. If they're a graduate student, they might want to change their office space so that they don't have to be in contact with the person who harmed them. But all of those things are about things that will make them individually feel safe. It's not about being punitive towards the person that harmed them. Most survivors want to be validated and that that they experienced harm, not sending people to prison. And none of those things that I mentioned that survivors most commonly want, cops can provide. Cops do not provide housing. Cops do not provide medical. They don't provide counseling. They don't provide any of those things that survivors need most after they're sexually assaulted. although to get some of those services, sometimes you are required to report to the police or are pulled into a system that you don't want to be a part of just to access things such as medical care, for example. And then moving into victims who do talk to the police, of the victims that report, most survivors report that cops are terrible at responding to the experience that they're talking about. So most survivors talk about being re-traumatized by police when they report to cops. That can be through victim blaming, and this is particularly the case for sexual assaults that don't fit the stereotypical stranger rape narrative, which, as I've already said, is not most sexual assaults. And yeah, so the police response is worse if you experience sexual assault that's not stereotypical. Particular groups of people are probably more likely to be blamed. So for example, sex workers who are sexually assaulted, they are definitely not going to get any help from the police because they are extremely stigmatized by cops. And as I've already stated, cops don't prevent sexual assault. So cops are always going to be responding to sexual violence. There is no scenario where a cop is going to be a preventative measure for sexual violence, because sexual violence is a structural problem, not an individual one. Also, police sexual misconduct is the second highest complaint against officers behind excessive force. So police are often often perpetrators of sexual violence themselves. Women of color are most likely to be the victims of sexual violence by police. So what do we do, particularly to the campus? We don't rely on cops, number one. We push for survivors' needs and voices to be listened to and to be centered and to be heard. Survivors should be given the accommodations that they need to feel safe without having to involve themselves in a system that is likely to re-traumatize them and that is likely to be, in some cases, worse than the actual rape that they experience themselves. A lot of survivors report feeling more traumatized by bad responses from people like the cops. Some other just really quick things. We could on campus, specifically in terms of like reporting, if we do want a reporting option, you know, some campuses are starting to do restorative justice reporting options, which I think more people will talk about that later on, so I won't necessarily define. Yeah, so restorative justice could be a reporting option that wouldn't involve police at all. And I'm going to stop there so that I make sure that everybody else gets their time.
All right, thanks so much, Erin. Next, we have Andrea Daviera.
Yeah, that is me. And I'm actually going to share some slides that I prepared for this. Just give me one quick second to set that up. Okay, so my name is Andrea Daviera. I am a white woman with dark brown hair. I identify as Italian American and also a Chicagoan. And I study violence, safety, and policing. And for the purpose of the next few minutes, I want to talk about violence and crime. So a few things before I get into all that is I do want to offer a content notice that we are going to be talking about some serious issues. So like Erin said, please feel free to check out if needed. So I personally don't just research violence. I've also survived it myself, like Erin also mentioned. And that is exactly why I think that violence should always be taken incredibly seriously. And that's also exactly why I think we need to be having this conversation. And before I talk about some myths relating to violence and policing, I kind of want to deconstruct these words that we use so often, violence and crime. So the World Health Organization's definition of violence includes intentional use of physical force or power, threatened or actual, against oneself, another person, group, or community, resulting in injury, death, psychological harm, maldevelopment, or deprivation. The definition of crime is an action or omission that constitutes an offense that may be prosecuted by the state and is punishable by law. The reason why I'm showing these definitions is because I want to make the connection that not all violence is a crime, not all crimes are punished, and who decides what is actually up to those and people and systems that are in power. And so when we talk about violence, we talk about these issues. I want us to really hold these definitions and that idea in our head. The first myth I want to talk about briefly is that police stop violent crime. While this is a really commonly held notion, it's actually not very substantiated because research has found that police only spend about 4% of their time addressing violent crime, and less than 5% of arrests are of violent offenses. So you might be thinking then, what do police actually do, and how do they then respond to violent incidences? So previous research has found that the vast majority of ways that police spend their time is by responding to non-criminal offenses. What I have displayed here is some bar graphs of data displayed where we see that about 30 to 40% of police time is spent on non-criminal calls, with a second proportion, most high proportion on traffic-related issues. Violent crime is all the way at the bottom of that list, only about 4% of police time. And what actually happens when you call the police, as someone that's actually had to do that quite a few times for violent incidences, police don't rush in to stop the violence in its moment. They tend to arrive after the fact. And like Aaron was talking about, when they do arrive, victims don't often feel very safe or comforted. The second myth I want to talk about is that policing reduces crime. Again, this is a really widely held belief about police. However, the research has been pretty inconsistent, and generally there's no consistent evidence that policing does reduce crime. In fact, there's been research that finds that contact with police increases young people's criminal behavior. It also increases such that the more contact you have with police, the more likely you're to be arrested. In this sense, police actually kind of create crime and criminals. And furthermore, research has also found that aggressive policing practices and concentrated incarceration actually leads to increases in crime, such that the more a neighborhood or community has concentrated policing practice and incarceration, the more likely that neighborhood is going to struggle with higher rates of crime. And since we often talk about defunding of the police, I also wanted to share this graphic. This displays the percent of change in police spending and the homicide rate since the 1990s. And as you can see, police spending has gone up and up and up over the years, while homicides have gone down, providing little justification for this increase in police spending over all these years. The last thing I want to talk about is Chicago. Because this is my home, this is what I study, kind of can't help myself. I want to draw attention to arrests in Chicago. And I've displayed two different kinds of data here, a pie graph that displays all arrests by race and ethnicity, and a map that shows where arrests actually occur. So as we can see, the vast overwhelming majority of arrests in Chicago are people who are identified as Black or white Hispanic, representing such a huge proportion of the total arrests in Chicago. And furthermore, arrests are spatially concentrated in the West Side and South Side neighborhoods, as you can see with these darker gradation colors. And so the final question I want to pose to you, and that I hope we could talk maybe a little bit more about later on, is that if policing actually increased safety, wouldn't these communities that we're looking at right now be the most safe? And does or does that not contradict what you know and think and believe about Chicago? And that's all I had. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Andrea. And next we have to give us some background on the history of police unions is Jeff Shirky. Take it away, Jeff.
Thank you. So my name is Jeff Shirky. I'm a labor historian and a member of UIC United Faculty. I'm a white man with short blonde hair, glasses, and I'm wearing a red shirt. So yes, I'm going to talk about a little bit about the history of policing and police unions. I'm going to talk quickly, so I apologize for talking really fast. A common myth about the police is that they exist for the purpose of keeping us all safe, public safety. But historically, that's not the actual purpose for why the police were created. The earliest policing entities in the United States were slave patrols in the South, whose purpose was to maintain control over enslaved Black workers and uphold a system of racial capitalism and white supremacy. The first modern urban police departments, like the Chicago Police Department, were founded in the mid to late 19th century. This was a time of rapid industrialization with a highly exploited industrial workforce, mainly composed of immigrants. And there was a growing economic gap between the haves and the have-nots. And wealthy elites in this time period were fearful of working class uprisings, which were happening in the form of major strikes, demanding things like the 8-hour workday, weekends, living wages, workplace safety, and end to child labor. So the wealthy were fearful of these kinds of strikes and uprisings, so they created police departments to protect themselves, to protect their wealth, protect their property, and to repress working class movements. As far as campus or university police departments, like UIC PD, for example, campus police didn't really exist until the 1960s and 70s. They were created as a reaction to student protests, major campus protests that were happening at the time against the Vietnam War, against systemic racism and other issues. University administrators started lobbying state legislatures to be allowed to create their own campus police departments to basically put down student protests, to intimidate or attack student protesters. It wasn't really about campus safety, it was about controlling protest. Now, for police unions, there's a whole history of police unions dating back to the early 20th century. There was a famous Boston police strike in 1919 that I don't have enough time to get into that, but maybe in the Q&A we could talk about it. But police unions first really started to become prominent in the 1960s and 70s. Again, this was an era of mass protest, of unrest, the civil rights movement, anti-war movement, the early LGBTQ movement, and others. And when there were these big protests, police were sent in to attack protesters and arrest them. So police, understandably, and I think justly, started to get a pretty bad image. And there were movements to protect people's civil liberties, to hold police accountable, to curb abuses by police officers. There was the 1966 Supreme Court case, Miranda v. Arizona, where Miranda rights come from. And the police unions, especially the Fraternal Order of Police, or FOP, started pushing back against all of this by trying to co-opt the language of these rights-based social movements and presenting themselves, the police, as a persecuted minority, demanding a law enforcement bill of rights, saying, what about us and our rights? Kind of a precursor to the Blue Lives Matter rhetoric as in response to Black Lives Matter. Police unions, you can think of themselves sort of co-opting the labor movement, which police had historically played a role in repressing. Police unions often get what they want because the wealthy elites and the authorities, city and state authorities, want to keep them satisfied to protect, again, basically protect the status quo power relations. Many studies have shown that police unionization is significantly correlated to more killing of unarmed civilians, especially racial minorities, by police. UIC PD is unionized with Fraternal Order of Police Lodge 7. Now, as long as there are campus police and as long as they have a union, the administration is legally expected to negotiate labor contracts with them to negotiate their working conditions. But that doesn't mean that UIC cannot reduce the number of campus police officers or disband the campus police department altogether. It only means they have to negotiate as long as the campus police exist. And finally, on behalf of UIC United faculty, I just want to quickly say that we do support, as a union, support the Student Coalition's demands around policing on campus from this summer, including having a real dialogue with the administration to make real changes. We see tonight's event as the start, but definitely not the end of this process, to make real change based on student-led demands. And also, United faculty has signed on to a statement by one of our parent unions, the American Association of University Professors, calling on universities to shift resources away from armed campus police toward initiatives that would benefit the safety and well-being of Black, Indigenous, people of color on campus, and to terminate relationships with private security companies and private companies that provide support to policing. So again, sorry that was really quick. but I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jeff. And now we're going to make a pivot and talk about prevention and promotion. And then we have Alexis from the Black Graduate Student Association, Layla and Mona from Students for Justice in Palestine, and Wasan from the Undergraduate Students Organization. Undergraduate Student Government, excuse me.
Yeah, thank you again for that, Dr. Stovall. So I've got a pretty easy job here. I only have to answer 2 specific questions. The first question is, how will you prevent crime if we don't have police? And the second question is, if a majority of people on campus feel safer with police present, why would we ask the university to dismantle the police? And so we've already had a fair bit of conversation so far about violent crime, about sexual violence, about police unions. And so I'll go back to that first question, which is, how will you prevent crime if we don't have police? And the answer to this question first starts, as many of my colleagues here today have already mentioned, at a critical examination of the role of police, both in our society and on our campus. Now, around the country, there have been many programs put into place, both on college campuses and in cities, as alternatives to crisis response and alternatives to policing. And at our own campus, I think it's really important to recognize that we have non-police and non-violent programs like the Red Car. Students will escort you through campus. And we want to keep thinking forward about programs like this, like mental health crisis counselors who arrive on the scene for these sorts of mental health emergencies, and other similar programs. Now, at the University of Chicago, just a few years ago, they've been having this exact same conversation because the UFC PD actually shot a student who was going through a mental health crisis. And so these calls have been going for maybe the past couple, I want to say like 4 years or so, over just a couple miles away from us in Hyde Park. It's also extremely important for us to recognize the ways in which UIC, both in its construction and relocation to the Chicago campus, has caused harm to the surrounding community, both through urban renewal programs and displacement, which actively engages in a sort of different form of colonialism than what I mentioned at the very beginning of this conversation today. And so through that, we should really take this as a call and an opportunity to consider investing resources in both mental health and housing for those that live in the community that we currently occupy. Now, as Professor Shirky was just speaking about with regards to strike breaking, these police departments at college campuses have been started across the country really over the past 40 years. And their roles have also begun to encroach beyond the campus to also the surrounding areas, specifically for us in the neighborhoods of Chicago and Little Italy. And now these areas have also generally seen increases in policing despite reductions in crime. So when we talk about defunding the police in the city of Chicago, well, that really extends to our campus here as well. And now for the second question that I was asked. So if a majority of people on campus feel safer with police present, why would we ask the university to dismantle the police? And so to answer this question, I really want to say, of course, that it is truly completely valid to be concerned about safety at UIC. And that's why we're here. That's why we're having this conversation. It's also a really big thing to rethink what we've been taught our entire lives about safety, about how we envision safety and how we keep ourselves safe, as well as society safe. And it leads me to ask a couple of questions as well, which is, like, how is UIC dealing with crime currently? And is this current approach working? Do people feel safe? And who does or who does not feel safe? And now I can say from my own personal experience, from the instances over last year, from the murder of our peer Ruth George, to the threat of a school shooting, to robberies at the Blue Line station, to a mugging that happened to a woman in broad daylight in the street just adjacent to the apartment that I lived in, that I don't necessarily feel safer with the police present here at UIC. Like I said, my job's pretty easy, so that's all I had to say today.
Definitely, and let's go ahead and transition to Layla and Mona for Students for Justice in Palestine.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm going to share a presentation with you, so just give me a moment here.
Alrighty. Hi all, my name's Mona. I'm an organizer with Students for Justice in Palestine. Just to give a brief intro as to what I look like, I'm a tan-skinned woman with bleach blonde hair and my Black roots growing in, and I identify as Arab and Central Asian.
Hi, my name is Layla. I'm also I'm also a member of Students for Justice in Palestine. I'm a pretty fair-skinned Arab. I have black hair, and I'm wearing a gray sweatshirt. So today we're going to be talking about countering violent extremism, also known as CVE. Okay, so before we begin, I want everyone to make a mental note on which one of these points, if not a couple, few, apply to you. So have you ever been outraged by the US or Western foreign policy, become involved in social activism or community issues, traveled to a country where you belong to the majority religious group, grown facial hair, experienced a desire for political or moral change, been at a transitional time in your life? So if you checked one or more of these boxes, you have been identified by the US government as a violent extremist. So what exactly is CVE? So CVE is a federal anti-terrorism program that claims to prevent or notice the signs of those who are or are becoming extremists. This program partners with police, mental health workers, teachers, and other community spaces, such as libraries or schools. This program relies on community members to report people who are vulnerable and express the signs of radicalization. So as like I used in the prior list, this is things like growing a beard or even like wearing a hijab. So when it comes down to it, CVE discriminates against Black, Arab, Muslim, Indigenous, and other minority groups in the United States. So some examples of this: Black Lives Matter is actually labeled as a Black extremist group and suspected gang activity. And the American War on Terror is an excuse for surveillance of Arab Americans. So this is one of their advertisements. Essentially, they tried to like come off as a very like friendly community like program that everyone can get involved in. And then this is another one of their advertisements. It's showing how they're like better on the left by saying like community engagement and counseling to prevent radicalization to violence. So it's like things that occur in a classroom or with a therapist. And this is, you know, compared to counterterrorism, which was like something that was done prior, which is like collecting evidence and making arrests before an event has occurred. So just like a little brief history of CVE. So former President Barack Obama actually pitched CVE in 2014. Obama claimed CVE was a friendlier model to previous anti-terrorism efforts. Some previous anti-terrorism efforts were like when the FBI would prey on people that were nonviolent and essentially make like an arrest on them. And it was very unfair and extremely racist. But, you know, unfortunately, CVE isn't too far from the tree. So instead, it preys on individuals by equating religious and cultural identities with violence. So like I said before, this is like basic stuff like wearing a hijab, growing a beard, you know, having, you know, different political beliefs. And it promotes community workers to work for law enforcement to identify and report these people. And police do this and, you know, work with these people because, you know, traditional police could not be in the spaces that teachers and mental health workers can be in, you know, so they get into those schools, they get into those therapist offices, and it's, you know, it's extremely messed up. So CVE by original design is anti-Black, anti-Arab, anti-Muslim, anti-immigration. And another example of this is Operation Boulder, where essentially in 1972 to 1975, it authorized the FBI to conduct special screenings of Arab visa applications.
So what exactly does CVE look like in Illinois? CVE is the federal program, but in Illinois, the program is called Targeted Violence Prevention Program, or TVPP. And it's pretty prominent within Illinois. It received $187,000 from a CVE grant from the Department of Homeland Security, in addition to $208,000 from state funding. TVPP is just as dangerous as CVE because it claims to borrow practices from public health models of gang and suicide prevention programs. But we know that there's no scientifically proven indicators that a person could be radicalizing or vulnerable to violence. So CVE and TPP using these disproven warning signs or lists of concerning behaviors to identify people that could be ideologically inspired to extremism and violence is just straight up unscientific and racist. But you're probably wondering how this relates to UIC and how UIC is involved in CVE. So UIC actually has an active partnership with Illinois CVE program, Targeted Violence Prevention Program, led by UIC psychiatry professor Stephen Wine, who also works in UIC School of Public Health. Wine is a prominent CVE researcher who is actually numerously cited by the Department of Homeland Security as one of their recommended CVE references. He's received several CVE-related research awards from DHS and the National Institute of Justice. One of his research actually was on Somali youth and potential indicators of radicalization in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And at UIC, he's been given a $26,000 research grant for CVE. So I just want to briefly talk about an instance that happened in 2017 on a campus event featured by Wine and also organized by Wine that was talking about preventing ideological inspired target violence using a public health approach. And when students and community members came to this event to counter protest, Wine actually called campus police on the protesters and had two of the protesters arrested even as they were complying to leave the space. And these two individuals were actually charged with criminal trespassing, even though the event was public. CVE has a large impact at UIC when you understand UIC's demographics. UIC has one of the largest Arab and Muslim student populations in the United States. And I really want to emphasize the "and" just because Arab and Muslim are not synonymous. It's not the same community. Not all Arabs are Muslim and not all Muslims are Arabs. UIC has one of the largest Arab populations in the country. We don't have numbers exactly on how many because Arab, Middle East, North Africa is actually considered white under UIC racial demographics, something actually that the Arab American Cultural Center at UIC is trying to change. And UIC has one of the largest Muslim student populations in the country with 15% of our student body identifying as Muslim. And this is important to note because CVE inherently implies that Arabs and Muslims are violent and deserve to be criminalized and spied on. And we really want to emphasize that UIC cannot claim to support Arab and Muslim students while sponsoring this program. Because not only does CVE create an unsafe campus environment for Arab and Muslim students, but also for Black students and Latinx, Indigenous, queer, transgender, and immigrant students, because all of these different identities intersect with one another. CVE, through increased surveillance, racial profiling, and broadening of law enforcement, creates an unsafe space at UIC. So we talk about CVE during this event because CVE is surveillance, and surveillance is a form of policing. So when we say abolish the police, it also means abolishing policing, and it also means abolishing surveillance. CVE is a form of policing as the everyday behaviors of Arab and Muslim students are watched and potentially recorded, and it extends the roles of community workers that we're supposed to trust, such as teachers and mental health workers, as the secret watchdogs of police. All in all, UIC cannot claim to support minority students if they allow this form of surveillance and policing on campus. And that's all we have to say.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Layla and Mona. And for folks who are interested in further interrogation of CVE, please look at the work of one of our colleagues, Nicole Wynn, who's in the College of Education, who actually looks at what was happening to those Somali youth and how they resisted CVE in the Twin Cities in Minnesota. Next up, we have Alexis from the Black Graduate Student Association.
Hi everyone, I'm Alexis Grant. I am a medium brown tone African-American woman with curly hair just below my shoulders. And today I wanted to talk a little bit about the relationship between divesting from the police and investing in students. As was mentioned by a lot of the other panelists, the policing supports an illusion of preventing bad things from happening, but there isn't really evidence that police reduces and prevents crime. But this illusion allows us to normalize seeing police every day, everywhere, at intersections on the street, outside and inside, everywhere we frequent, going from stores to our buildings on campus. But it's really not normal for someone to be waiting and expecting for something bad to happen to us as students, faculty, and staff. And as we talked about, it's really not effective in preventing any sort of crime or violence, and it doesn't really promote well-being. And it can actually bring more harm than good. So there's this narrative that supports keeping our system the same, and this underlying idea that police offer some kind of protection to the community that we are unable to supply for ourselves. So with this rationale, I have a couple of questions for you all as audience members, and thinking about thinking critically and thinking as we move into the further portion of this as we go into dialogue. So some questions. What do the police prevent at UIC? Who do they protect at UIC? Do you feel safe? Do all of your colleagues feel safe? What would promotion of safety look like? Is someone with a badge in a couple weeks or a couple months of training able to promote your safety? And what is it worth in terms of resources? So as we discussed already, the policing system was never designed for crime prevention and not for the promotion of well-being. And I find it really important to emphasize that the student demands of investing in the students and faculty and staff cannot be met without divesting from the police. So we know that $8 million has been budgeted for the police, the UIC Police Department. And we know that even outside the university, across our whole society, human and social services are underfunded. And so to keep paying into the police is taking away funds from things that students, faculty, and staff actually do need to protect their safety and well-being, like mental health resources, high quality healthcare, safe housing, academic support, inclusive support from faculty. And we really need to rethink what it looks like to protect and promote the well-being of the students, faculty, and staff at UIC. And policing doesn't really align with those needs of promoting well-being and promoting campus safety. And recently, I'm not sure if folks saw, there was a citywide survey administered to almost 40,000 Chicago residents, and folks ranked the importance of community services, including violence prevention, homeless support services, and youth services as the highest priority, and police services were the lowest priority for the city. And almost 90% of respondents of that citywide survey believe that city resources should be reallocated and that money should come out of police services. So we see that across the city, there is support for this. And I saw these results and I was thinking about how the university and institutions of higher learning should be a place of innovation. UIC should be an example for the city, showing the city and other institutions of higher education what public safety could look like and re-envisioning what public safety looks like. So thinking about the creation of the Public Safety Board, it's not the solution that we are asking for or hoping for. That charge is mainly to review policies, practices, and protocols and present recommendations to the chancellor. But changing the practices still has the underlying assumption that the police are necessary and effective for preventing crime and protecting students, which is an unfair and unfounded assumption. As Jeff said in his overview of the history of policing, policing was created as a method of control over minorities. And in the words of Audre Lorde, who said, "The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. They may allow us to temporarily to beat him at his own game, but they will never enable us to bring about genuine change." And I think this applies to policing as well. So building from our existing structures of what campus safety looks like right now is not going to work. We need to completely re-envision public safety and campus safety to see the changes that we wish to see. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Alexis. And now we're going to make another pivot and talk about the future of UIC. And we have Elizabeth Harrison from Abolition at UIC and Jamoke Taiwo from Abolition at UIC and the Undergraduate Student Government Association. So let me go ahead and hand it off to them.
Thanks, Dr. Stovall. This is Elizabeth speaking. I am a white person with very short brown hair and glasses. I am a queer and disabled PhD student in disability studies, and I'm delighted to be here on behalf of the Abolition at UIC collective. So first, I just want to say that I learned what I'm about to talk about from a lot of different sources, a lot of abolitionist thinkers, specifically Black feminist thinkers and disability justice thinkers. And so I'm going to, after I'm done talking and after Jamoke is done talking, I'm going to go ahead and put a link in the chat with some of the resources that both of us drew from as we were preparing these remarks. So I first just want to say that when we're thinking about the future, I think sometimes we're, thinking as if we have to start completely from scratch. And I don't think it's wrong to try to think incredibly creatively about things we've never seen before, but also a lot of the things that we're hoping for community care, for safety without police, they're already happening in certain places, right? So when we see these mutual aid networks where neighbors were helping each other during the pandemic, that is a form of an abolitionist solution to community problems, that we're not relying on police, we're helping each other out between us. When you see what happens outside jail support over this summer, when there were lots of people being released from jail, and there were folks from all over the city who came with snacks and resources to help people, this is an abolitionist future. When you look in disability community, in how people are supporting each other and sharing resources and working in interdependence, this is all something that we can draw from when we're thinking about the future. So yes, let's think about totally new things that we've never seen before, but also let's realize that we already have some skills and foundations to build from. So starting there, I just want to say two things that I think, building off of what Alexis said, can be both means and ends towards an abolitionist future without police at UIC. So first, there's the structural component, and Alexis spoke really well to this. What's great about the invest and divest approach of the student demands is that if you divest from policing, there are more resources that can just automatically be put into investing into other things. And abolition is not just about getting rid of these things that we don't want, getting rid of punishment and surveillance. It's also about a lot of things that we do want and creating room for those things and creating freedom for us to give ourselves those things. And so if we're investing in students on campus, I envision that all students have access to food and water and housing and healthcare, all of this for free. Have access to free tuition, so students are more able to pursue their education, be members of the community, and they're not stressed with this constant feeling of scarcity. So the first thing is structural, right? That we need these structural foundations for a more just society. And then the second aspect is interpersonal and care and how we are in community with each other. So this is something that we've probably been hearing a lot this summer as the Black Lives Matter protests and movement to defund the police has gotten even more media attention, that we keep each other safe. This is a constantly used refrain. And I want us to really think about that. We keep each other safe means that we're responsible for this work, right? So I think a lot of times when people are thinking about alternatives to policing, they're saying, well, who do I call if I don't call the police? And the answer is not so much, in my perspective, that we have another list of outsiders that we can call. It's that we are learning how to rely on each other and rely on ourselves and rely on our neighbors. So Liat Ben Moshe, in one of the teach-ins we did this summer throughout Abolition at UIC, referred to this as skilling ourselves. That's SKILLING, skilling ourselves. I hadn't heard that word before. So skilling ourselves means building up these skills so that we can do some of these things that our neighbors might need, right? So de-escalation, first aid, offering sex education that includes a very firm understanding of consent, bystander intervention training. And I say all these things because we do need to build up the resources within ourselves to address this, but also I know that university might be quick to hear this and say, great, more trainings, we can offer more trainings, but that structural foundation is also needed, right? So if we have healthcare and food and housing and tuition, we will have less scarcity. We won't be working 3 jobs. We won't be so spread thin, that we can actually invest more in our community and invest more in learning these things and having these interpersonal relationships with each other. So policing isolates us, it separates us, it creates mistrust. This culture of policing all around us, it creates mistrust. So I want to see that these aspects of care and rebuilding interpersonal trust and learning to depend on each other is a really vital part of the work. So the last thing I want to just end on before I pass it off to my friend is thinking about futurity. So I think sometimes as academics, perhaps especially, we're thinking about, you know, we want this concrete solution, we want an experiment that we can try tomorrow, and we're thinking about this future visioning as kind of fluffy. But Black feminism and disability justice teach us that this abolitionist dreaming, this dreaming towards justice and just futures is actually a vital part of the work. So I want to leave us with the thought that these like messy and abstract conversations, these interpersonal negotiations, learning about each other, learning how to be in community with each other, imagination and care, this is actually a vital foundation of the work, and we need to make time and space for it as well. And that's how we're going to get there, right? Is both through this, that's both the means and also the end, this future that we are actually caring for each other and giving space for these things so that we can keep each other safe. So with that, I'm going to pass it for a little more on care and imagination to Jamoka.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jamoka Taiwo. Also, I go by Jumi. I'm a dark-skinned Black person with locks, wearing glasses, a pink top, a cardigan, a black cardigan sweater. I'm in a blue room with a lot of posters. To reintroduce, I am an undergraduate here at UIC. I'm studying public policy, minoring in political science. I use they, them pronouns. I actually, on this campus, wear a lot of hats. I'm part of the coalition Abolition at UIC, like Elizabeth. I'm the human rights policy coordinator at our school's Roosevelt Network, as well as the managing editor of Bonfire, a managing editor at Bonfire, our campus's independent news publication. Outside of UIC, I'm an organizer, an artist, but I think that though all of this background informs what I was brought here to say, abolition is the thing that I'm really here, or I really want to talk about my background coming into that and why I came into abolition. And like Elizabeth spoke on, it's that aspect of care and imagination and that dreaming that comes out of that care, that when you realize that you can go about life looking to your neighbor and helping out your community, then what does it look like creating a world where everybody can have the capacity to do that, where everyone's needs are met? And we start by building right now and right here, the world where we can meet our needs. Because as we realize right now, as so many of us of marginalized and oppressed identities have realized, these intersecting oppressions and these institutions continue to just reflect and pass down this legacy and this legacy and this foundation of capitalist, racist, anti-Black, specifically ableist, like all of these structures of oppression are just reflected in all of the state's tools. That means policing, that means the institution of UIC, and all of these universities that we take part in. And when we think about care, we think about getting to the root of what is the problem and what care can only be given when you recognize that. So it's up to us as a community to be doing that. I think that in terms of policy, that's what we are doing. Like, as Elizabeth spoke on before, like having these conversations is the first, as Elizabeth and everyone else spoke on before, actually, like having all of these conversations is the first step and are so necessary to be able to give people the ability to have voice to what they're facing. And that's not just students, that's all of the faculty, that's all of the staff. And having the institution not just be here to hear our harms, but also to implement the policies and actionable steps that we discuss. And things that we're discussing as actionable steps is, like at the Roosevelt Network, is a policy that is working towards things like an emergency fund, testing facilities to communities affected by COVID, not just the UIC students, because we understand, when we understand care, that it's not just us and our direct communities that we care about, but all of us. And just like with the policy, just less rigid, these pass-fails options, these mandatory attendance bans, like all of these reflecting care, because we understand when we care about one another that these are the things that these visions or these rigid structures that we exist in don't reflect care and don't reflect actually taking care of one another. Because of abolition and because we're building the world that we want to see, I think that we can be building these structures and not be our promotion. But that is what I leave you all with. Take care and take imagination.
Definitely. Thank you. Thank you so much, Elizabeth and Jamoka. What we want to do now is transition, and thank you again to all the panelists for actually engaging us, informing us, and being right on time. What we want to do now is move to our Q&A section, and we have a couple of moderators. We have Ashley from the Black Student Union, we have Maddie and Dawn from GEO, and they'll assist with the chat and presenting questions to the panelists. So I'll turn it over to you all.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ashley Hassel. I am the president of Black Student Union, and I'm also on the Business Diversity Committee at UIC. I am a Black woman with locks and a ponytail and a blue shirt with a black headband. Sorry, put myself on mute. So the first question I am seeing at the top right now is, what does current researchers say about after the crime investigations? How much time do police spend investigating past crimes? Does that have a correlation with the crime and safety strategy?
Yeah, I'm happy to take this question on as someone that has done a little bit of research on safety in Chicago. So the short answer is no. Um, when people have done research on people's perceived safety after an investigation has been completed, even then people tend not to feel safe. That's because the justice system tends to leave people who have experienced crimes or violence with little support inherent in that justice system. Like was previously mentioned, sometimes you are required to like work with police or the justice system to receive services. But generally that's not something that actually has been found to increase safety. And then I think part of the question was also specifically trying to investigate when people are investigating past crimes. Again, I think there's also a bit of a misconception there of how much police spend their time investigating past crimes. I don't believe that police tend to spend lots of time chasing down crimes that have been done in the past, like those cold case file shows. I don't think is actually very representative of the average police department. I could go on, but I'd like to leave more time for people to ask other questions.
I'll just say really quickly to that, just specific to sexual assault investigations. I didn't talk about this when I was talking before, but a lot of victims who go to the hospital might get what's called a rape kit exam done, which is where a nurse collects forensic evidence, as well as provides them with like birth control or STI like tests and prevention. And they collect that evidence to be used in a subsequent investigation. But as I already said before, that's generally not used, and there's a lot of backlogs of rape kits not being tested or used for any type of investigatory purposes, and the state like owns that as well. Like a victim can't like take that home with them. Like the state owns the evidence that was collected. So like that the things that you would think even would help like an investigative process aren't used by police because they just don't investigate. And also like I think the murder like clearance rate in Chicago specifically is like really low. But they keep hiring more cops, like, but that doesn't change. So that's also just like specific to murder in Chicago, but like they don't do a very good job with investigating crime, violent crime.
Hi, I'm Dawn Teft with GEO. I'm a white woman in an orange sweater in a dimly lit room. And I'm going to be posing the next question, which was just upvoted to the top. Thank you to all the panelists. Some really great ideas were presented. How responsive has UIC administration been to making suggested changes, and do you anticipate they'll be responsive in the near future?
This is Alexis. I can take a crack at this one. So I think the UIC administration has acknowledged the petitions and kind of the asks of students and faculty. So the student demands letter is delivered back in June, and since then the chancellor has convened a number of working groups addressing student life and support, faculty recruitment and retention, and community engagement, which I think several of us on the panel have been involved or in the loop with that in some way, shape, or form, as well as that creation of the public safety, the police safety board. And so there's been a kind of move to have these conversations of like looking at what to do, what could work. I think the administration has largely taken an approach of pulling together the demands that have been said. Like a lot of the student demands are nothing new. They're not things that have never been asked in the past. So there's been reports to the university every year with kind of the same problems that are outlined in the student demands letter. So I think one thing that I'm interested to see with the administration is seeing the actual tangible changes. Because in the past, there's a saying that like committees is where good ideas go to die. we spend so much time talking about and planning the changes that they never get implemented. So I think there's kind of this systemic culture of like, let's create a committee and let's talk about it and let's really understand the problem. And I think in the current space and the time that we have, it's not necessarily needed because we have the evidence. We're mostly all students and we're not experts in any of these topics, but we found the support for them and we can envision a different future. So I think it's about taking that leap because we know that what we currently have doesn't work. So let's just move on.
This is Elizabeth speaking. I just wanted to really strongly echo everything that Alexis said first. And I also wanted to say that we took the time at Abolition at UIC with some inputs from some of our allies across the coalition to make a statement about the events of the summer and the ways that our activism was met by the administration, or mostly not met, mostly ignored and dismissed by the administration. So I'm going to drop that link in the chat too, just as an accounting of everything that went on, because I think another way that this works is, through lack of transparency and thinking that we're going to get so stressed with school that we'll forget about it, which is true. School is very stressful, but we're not forgetting about it. We're still here and we still want them to keep listening to us. So yeah, just echoing everything Alexis said, that after we really, really push, occasionally they acknowledge a little, but we want a lot more.
Hi, my name's Mal Townsend. I'm a white trans lady, and I'm here with the National Lawyers Guild. The next question we wanted to raise from the chat is, what other specific recommendations are there for creating a safe environment on campus? Student escorts, ... question mark?
I think I mentioned part of this, and hopefully other people can chime in as well. But some of the things that we have been talking about specifically were, yes, like student escort services for transport around campus. We have like the red car program for, again, transport between the campuses. But again, like we also spent a lot of time today talking about mutual aid and care and community. That's definitely a big part of it. And the honest answer for me is that I don't necessarily have all of the answers yet. This is still something that we are working through, working towards, and thinking about together again, like as we sort of imagine what this future looks like. But definitely, like our main focus is again to think about preventative measures, ways that we can provide resources in response to incarceration. And that's kind of like what the imagining looks like overall in this process.
Yeah, and I also wanted to chime in just a little bit on this and think really broadly about what safety actually is and what it means. In my research with young Chicagoans, safety is really experienced when people feel like they belong and when they are cared for. This is why I think it's really crucial to understand this, because things like surveillance, policing makes you feel the opposite. It makes you feel like you don't belong, that you're not welcome, that you shouldn't be there. And so ways that we can support those feelings of belongingness, connectedness, like someone is welcomed there, really should be in the spirit of UIC's commitment to diversity, which it says it's so committed to supporting diversity and supporting students. And so if we invested in things like maybe the cultural centers, invested in things like counseling, providing like counseling and counselors that are the same racial, ethnic, and gender and sexual orientation of our student body, we could be investing in safety.
Thank you for that. Once again, it's Ashley Hassel from Black Student Union. My next question for the panelists is, how can students get involved in petitioning for actual change on campus?
I can start off with this one. So I think, I'm not sure Elizabeth wants to follow me, but really cool thing about the time that we're in is that we have a lot of conversation happening and a lot of people who are interested in engaging in advocacy who may not necessarily identify as minority, but are real allies, which I'm very grateful for. So thank you to everyone. And so one of the things that the Black Graduate Student Association started over the summer was just pulling together students who were interested in really engaging in these issues and engaging in action. And since then, we've kind of we've evolved into this coalition, and we're calling ourselves the Good Trouble Coalition. And our goal is really to keep pressing on these student demands and thinking about and continually re-envisioning and creating the university that we want. And so the coalition is open to students, faculty, and staff, and it's really a space to foster these discussions and keep engaging in these discussions and coordinating action. And so I can drop a link in the chat with a little fact sheet we have about the Good Trouble Coalition, and that will have the information about how to get involved in that.
Thanks, Alexis. And I think there might be information about another group on campus, which is Abolition at UIC, also in that doc. But if not, I'll drop our email address in the chat as well. But yeah, we would love to have folks involved in one or both organizations. And I also wanted to kind of jump ahead that I saw there was a question from a faculty member about how faculty could get involved, and other panelists might have ideas of many other ways that faculty could get involved. But one thing I'll say is that faculty are also welcome on those coalitions or welcome at Abolition at UIC, and that could be a way to get keyed into what we're working on and lend your support that way. We would really appreciate it.
And for folks, the faculty member who asked that question, I'm a member of Abolition at UIC, and another way that I think faculty can also be involved is to make sure that you, if you can, serve as advisors to some of these student organizations that actually need support in the issues that they've identified. So it's a thing around actually seeing our presence as faculty in these spaces where folks have identified the issues and concerns that have, like the ones that have been expressed tonight.
And also just one last pitch is that you're always, graduate students are always welcome to get involved in GEO, the Graduate Employees Organization, which is actively participating in a lot of this movement building, and even has things like a sexual assault task force, which has been really central, and I know Erin is a leader in.
I also want to add one last thing. This is Alexis again. I encourage any students, faculty, or staff. There are a lot of task forces and groups and committees across all of the colleges that touch on a variety of different issues, like with curriculum and instruction and research protocols and all of that. And I encourage you, if you're involved in that, speak up about the ways that you see racism and white supremacy manifesting itself in the policies and procedures that are in your department, because it is so pervasive and it is very normal in the academy. And I think a lot of times we think of things as the way it's always been done. And I encourage everyone to think more creatively about the way that we are engaged in the academy.
This is Dawn Teft with GEO again. And our next question, I feel like was sufficiently answered by the response to the previous one. However, I will give it about half a minute in case somebody feels like it wasn't. And then if not, then I'll just move on to the next one. How about that? So such an informative panel. Thanks so much. What can we do as faculty or staff to support the demands and especially students' work to push it forward?
Hi, this is Erin. I just wanted to quickly say, in addition to what Elizabeth already mentioned, that some things that faculty and staff could do is, first of all, so I know that Abolition at UIC organized a rally and a direct action. So if faculty and staff should also be at those, number one, if they're able to. Number two, statements of support from departments that are signed by all of the faculty, supporting the demands that have been laid out by both the Good Trouble Coalition and Yeah, by the Good Trouble Coalition. Without us having to ask you to do that, like, you should be supportive of what your students are saying. They've already said it, so just write a statement of support. We shouldn't have to ask you to do that. And number three, if you can, organizing can be expensive and take a lot of time. And if your department is able to and has the money, throw money at what we're doing. This entire panel is basically undergraduates and graduate students. We're the most underpaid workers on this campus, and throw money at what we're doing. So just briefly say that.
As a moderator, I just want to quickly make a point of correction that it was the Good Trouble Coalition that organized the rally, and we will be holding future rallies too, so please keep an eye out for those. And I'll leave the question open for others who want to respond, since people felt it wasn't sufficiently answered by the previous question or responses.
This is Jeff speaking. Just for faculty who are watching and want to get involved, just want to make a pitch for United Faculty, our union. There was just recently a racial justice working group created within United Faculty. We're starting to have many discussions about mainly about how we can support student demands as a union, and particularly looking at what other faculty unions have been doing around some of these issues around policing and campus safety and racial justice, and thinking about that for our next contract campaign, which is still a couple of years away, but we're already starting to think about it. So faculty should definitely get involved with United Faculty and get involved in the racial justice working group in our union.
I also wanted to add, this is Jimmy speaking, that if you don't feel sufficiently or that you can speak up, though you should, or if you're able to, that you should also support the students in the work that they're putting out by being a part of it. Speaking specifically about Bonfire, just plugging, but like the faculty having the ability to give voice to their criticisms of the university, we want that there. We want to be the kind of space and have the kind of space, just have the kind of space as a community to be able to give voice to all of the things that we want to say, and all of our critiques for the university, our critiques for the institution, and just being in support of like the town halls and the other efforts that are being done by other organizations. So just being in point with them, or just, I don't know if there's like a listserv, but just being in point with all of these organizations, all of the work that the students are doing right now, and just adding on to it. So just reiterating what everyone's saying. Oh, sorry, I forgot. I also wanted to plug that I knew that Anak Bayan, the group on campus, was working towards something. And again, like networks like the Roosevelt Network, organizations like the Roosevelt Network are working towards policies and actionable changes and action items, and all of these rallies and all of these campaigns that you should be signing on to.
Hello all, this is Mal and Townsend again. The next question I wanted to ask was, thank you all, this has been an excellent panel. What are your thoughts about the FBI and CIA recruiting on campus?
I can take this on. So UIC actually has a partnership with the FBI and CIA on campus. The CIA partnership specifically is called the Signature CIA program. And I really just want to emphasize that these partnerships are not normal. Universities don't normally do this. UIC is one of 4 universities in the country that has this partnership with the CIA. And it's specifically because they're targeting UIC demographics. UIC is the fifth most diverse university in the country, and the CIA knows that, and that's why they're here. And they have specifically stated that they're looking for students that speak Spanish and students that speak Arabic, but also understanding like why they're looking for those students. You have to understand the history of the CIA and like the history of the CIA overthrowing rulers in Latin America and South America, and the CIA's involvement in the Middle East and North Africa. So it is no coincidence that the CIA has a presence on campus, and it's no coincidence that they have access to student information, which I like. It really like boggles me that they have access to that information, and I think that's a really good question talking about FBI, CIA presence. And there's actually an organization on campus called Students for a Democratic Society that is taking this campaign and like protesting this alliance.
Hello, it's Ashley Hassel again. My next question is, police divestment is usually posed as a step that enables reinvestments into the community as a means of reducing crime via investment in housing and food security, social services, etc. While as a student, I'm not going to turn down reinvestments in the student population. How does reinvestments in the student population aim to reduce the conditions that?
So I'm assuming that the end of this question was to aim to reduce the conditions that promote violence or something like crime or something like that. And sort of just going off of that, I want to say that this university does not exist in a vacuum. It's not like a net carbon of this university just being in this specific area in Chicago. Specifically, the fact that we were relocated here is something that's caused displacement. It has caused harm in the community that we're in the Little Italy space that we're in. And so as such, it's extremely important to think about both our campus and also the surrounding area as places where we should be reinvesting into the community. And as you mentioned, housing, food insecurity, so on and so forth. And then also understanding that policing does not end at JST. It doesn't just go from JST to TBH or wherever else you live on campus. But it really extends throughout this entire area, throughout this entire precinct. And so when we're talking about these sorts of like broader calls, like in the entire city of Chicago, that also is very pertinent to our campus specifically. Now, we had already sort of mentioned some of the various like both tactics as well as like policies that we'd like to see in terms of safety resources increase on campus. And I think that that definitely does aim to reduce these conditions, as you sort of mentioned in this question.
And I'll just briefly say, and this is Erin, in terms of like what could be reinvested into students if money was taken away from, if UIC police was disbanded tomorrow, I think somebody mentioned, $8 million. Undergraduate student workers could be paid Chicago's minimum wage. So undergraduate student workers are paid the state minimum wage, which is less than the Chicago minimum wage. Because UIC is a state institution, they legally can do that, which is ridiculous. And the fact that undergraduate workers are underpaid is a travesty. And the fact that they're still paying cops to do what? Basically nothing. So talk about reinvesting in yourself. You could get paid more money if we didn't have a UIC police force.
This is Dawn Tuft with GEO again. We have about, I think, 5 minutes left in the time for the town hall. So I want to quickly ask David and Alexis, do we want to take one more question, or did we have a sort of closing out that we wanted to do?
I think we could take one more.
Okay. So let's see. Thank you to all the panelists. Do you know of other campuses who have practiced divestment and investment and abolition? What happened?
I'm so sorry. I don't mean to keep talking. My name's Erin again. So I'll just briefly say that graduate workers at both the University of California system and University of Michigan system in their strikes included demands around divesting from campus police and like city police and campus partnerships, and other stuff related to defunding police and abolition. I know that University of Michigan was not as successful on those demands specifically, but it was also illegal for them to strike in the state. So they were taking an incredible, and it was also illegal for UC Santa Cruz to go on strike, I think, as well, because it was a wildcat strike. I don't actually know what, but I think both campuses are still like working towards those goals. This takes a while. It takes a lot of organizing because the state is really powerful and the university is really powerful. So it's not that other people aren't doing this. They definitely are, and doing stuff like going on strike is definitely a way to get some of these demands that we're talking about.
I could just pick up on that briefly. This is somewhat related to the last two questions about money being moved around for other better purposes than policing. Just another example at Rutgers University, the faculty union nearly went on strike last year, and one of their demands that they won was a commitment in writing from the university administration to put $40 million towards diversity in hiring of faculty, to hire more diverse faculty, which is another kind of thing that universities should be spending money on. Obviously, to have faculty that are more representative of the student body is pretty important.
And I just wanted to make a couple of things, a couple of statements that there is this really broad nationwide movement of universities trying to abolish and police, divest from police, and cut ties with their universities, with the criminal justice system broadly. And Minneapolis University actually also just divested from police themselves following the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd. And then I want to reiterate one point that Jeff Shirkey mentioned, which is that university police has not always been something that's been around. It only really came about to address like our own organizing and labor movements in the 60s and 70s. So police-free campuses used to exist, and they likely will probably exist in the future. There's movements in right here in Chicago, at U Chicago and Loyola, to get cops off campus, as well as our own UIC, as you can tell. I think it's really about trying to, again, like use our imagination to build that future for ourselves, that community-driven, locally driven practice of trying to establish transformative and restorative justice.
All right, everyone, we are at 7:30. And again, thank you to all the panelists for sharing your wisdom with us. Thank you for the exchange. And thank you for being punctual. Like, this is, man, Good Trouble Coalition. Y'all on point. Yo, man, start on time, end on time. Look, this is what it is. So for people who are watching tonight, please look up the information that Elizabeth put in the chat around the Good Trouble Coalition. Also, the information around abolition at UIC. These are two spaces that are moving forward and pushing the envelope around meeting student needs and addressing these issues and concerns that are not just local to UIC, but are international concerns. So again, thanks to everyone for participating, and we will see you all again. Have a good night and be safe.